Okay, on today's episode of the Investing City podcast, really excited to have Tyler Okland on. So thanks for being here, Tyler.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Sweet. So I just want to jump right in. Just give us the Opendoor pitch and why you're excited about it.
Yeah. So Opendoor is a relatively new company to the market, but it's an iBuyer in residential real estate. And so what they do is they sort of offer a digital solution to buy and sell your home. So as opposed to the traditional experience, which can take upwards of 90 days, has 1 in 10 chance of falling through, and is widely regarded as one of the most painful experiences that someone goes through in their life. Opendoor offers simplicity, certainty, and speed in that transaction, and gives a lot of transparency back to the consumer. So their whole business model is iBuying, the buying and selling of residential real estate homes in the United States. The reason I'm excited about the company is, one, because it's one of the largest markets that I'm aware of in the world that's gone completely undisrupted. It's a very fragmented model and people don't enjoy it. And so a company coming in and revolutionizing that space and optimizing it with technology was exciting, number one. But then when you look at sort of the deeper culture, the opportunity that they have to reimagine real estate in the future, it's just, there's a lot of things about it that are really exciting and misunderstood, and that got me excited.
That's great. So I would love for you to talk to that culture and some of the tangible things that you found as you were digging that really excited you.
Yeah. So one of the things that's important to look back on for Opendoor and understand is it's a very low margin business. So it's like a transaction company. They take 5% fee when a homeowner sells their home to Opendoor, and then Opendoor basically makes back that fee when it sells the home to someone else. So they're a transaction company in that regard, but that 5% fee is where their margin is. And so as you can imagine, it's a very small margin business. And so as a result of being a very small margin business, Opendoor has had to be very frugal, very operationally excellent from day one. And I think that's manifested in some pretty creative ways. Like, for example, they had a salary cap for the first 2 years. No employee made over $120,000. They've had a centralized operations, and they've really been focused on identifying what I call missionaries rather than mercenaries, people that are passionate about the problem space and really just excited about the concept and the possibility of revolutionizing residential real estate.
Yeah, I think the core value of Bips for breakfast is really interesting of the company, and it says a lot, exactly like you were mentioning. So 5% service fee, and does that go up and down based on different factors? Like 5% is the base, and then how does that work? And then are they trying to consistently increase the amount that they're selling it for? And like how many renovations do they do? And just kind of walk us through the business model there.
Yeah. It's interesting because the fee has changed a lot since the inception of the company. It used to be a fluid fee based on a variety of factors like risk, how old the home is, how fast that market's going. And now it's a fixed flat 5% fee. But when they underwrite, when they offer the home's value to the customer, they're including more of those other aspects like risk and how hot or cold the market is, how fast they think they can sell. And that cost that they've passed on to consumers has contracted sharply over the past few years as their automated valuation model has improved. But yeah, so in a down market, for example, in a buyer's market, they might offer a little bit less for a home in order to make their margin, but their long-term contribution profit margin is in the 4 to 6% range. Gotcha.
And going off of that, I think some skeptics would say that, since 2020, the real estate market has been on absolute fire, and HPA, home price appreciation, has been going crazy. And so even in this environment, Opendoor hasn't been able to, be positive on contribution margin like very often. And so I would love for you to kind of provide a rebuttal to that.
Yeah. So the first thing I guess I'd say is Opendoor has been contribution margin positive for the past 20 quarters. So 5 years in a row, they haven't missed a beat when it's come to unit economics, which I think is encouraging. But even still, their adjusted EBITDA margins were negative pretty much every year up until 2021. But the more important thing to unpack there is the argument, which I think is flawed, that somehow a seller's market is good for Opendoor's business. The seller's market is what we had in 2021. It's like you have a home, you put it on the market, people are promising like their firstborn to you and double your asking price. That's a red hot seller's market. Opendoor's core product is sell to Opendoor. That's a product that's meant to make selling a home easier, right? It's a tool for sellers who historically have very little transparency, don't have liquidity in their transaction. And so the fact that Opendoor was able to 14x revenue in Q4 and grow at the scale that it was, despite it being in a red hot seller's market, that was actually a headwind. And I think it really speaks to their product market fit that they were able to do what they did in 2021, despite the headwinds of the seller's market.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because it's not like, I mean, sure that it's easier to offload inventory, but to actually get that inventory in the first place at very high prices is very difficult. And just for them to do it at the scale that they've done it is very impressive. I guess another kind of bear thesis is that interest rates, are rising, and so they have all this inventory and it'd be harder to offload because demand is slowing. And so I'd love for you to just provide a perspective on that.
Yeah, so Opendoor finances the vast majority of its home purchasing through debt financing. And so currently they have access to about $9 billion in debt capital, and then they have $2.2 billion in equity capital. And they're holding homes for about 120 days. That's like their average, right? So that's 3 turns of home transactions in a given year. So, you take a 1% interest rate rise and you can expect a 30 basis point impairment in their bottom line. So 1% up with interest rates, we might see a 0.3% decline in margins. But again, and Carrie Wheeler, the CFO of Opendoor, spoke to this during Q4, or perhaps the investor presentation, I'm not sure, but she said that Opendoor will incorporate rises in interest rates to their offers. And the customer won't really feel that because it's 30 basis points. I mean, it's a very small thing, but they're guiding for this narrow set of guideposts. And so interest rates go up, 0.3 will be factored into their fees. So I don't expect it to materially impact margins or growth.
Gotcha. And I would love for you to talk to Zillow getting out of the market and kind of the differing perspectives on that. Some people thinking that, iBuying is dead, Zillow can pull it off, versus, maybe this is Opendoor's special sauce. Yeah,
it's a great question. It's been an interesting year for iBuying. Just as some historical backstory, I think it's important to remember that the current CEO of Zillow, Rich Barton, came back to the company he founded in 2018 to serve as CEO, basically to turn Zillow into an iBuyer, right? The Zillow 2.0 transformation was predicated on his fear that Zillow would be displaced as a marketplace by one of the iBuyers if they didn't leverage themselves into that space. And so 3 years, billions of dollars, CEO change, a lot of really nice sound bites about the future of prop tech and residential real estate. And in Q3, the business was shuttered. I think there's a lot to speculate on this. What we do know is that Zillow was playing a game called Project Catch Up, which was an internal project at Zillow where they were trying to catch up with the scale that Opendoor was achieving. And so they continue to make more and more offers on homes at higher and higher prices. And it happened to be at the worst possible time, because in Q3 of this past year, HPA started to decline. So it actually became a declining environment. Zillow kept paying more and more for homes, and we're left holding the bag on a lot of inventory that they paid more than it's worth, which was a problem. I think, by comparison, Opendoor didn't seem to have any of those problems, right? They They had on average, I think, about 8.5% gross profit margins in the second half of 2021. But I do think that they were lower than expected. And I almost wonder if Opendoor and Zillow were playing like a game of digital chicken, and they were like, come on, keep up if you can. And they were willing to take a few points of margin impairment to knock off their closest competitor.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that makes a lot of sense. And so have you looked into other competitors? Like, what are your thoughts on Redfin's iBuying? It's, fairly niche versus OfferPad. Are they just subscale? Will they never kind of get to the level of Opendoor? I think those two are kind of interesting to talk about.
Yeah, totally agree. I've looked pretty deeply into all the players in the space. Starting with Redfin, I'm a little worried about what Redfin's doing. I'm a lot worried. They're currently operating at contribution profits around break even, which is about 400 to 600 basis points lower than it needs to be. And similarly, about that percentage lower than even Zillow was when Zillow failed. It's a big money losing business, and it's currently, the entirety of Redfin's revenue growth. What I've said before is that iBuying is not a side hustle. It's not like a hobby that you do on the weekend. It's all or nothing, right? There's no half measures. You got to be all in to make it possible. And not only that, but you have to have been all in from the start, right? Your culture needs to be on point. You can't have, nap pods and soft serve ice cream stations. If you're an iBuyer, you have to be a lean, operationally excellent warrior. Just to survive in the space, because all those bips for breakfast, like you're talking about, if those are being spent on perks and things that you traditionally see at a high margin tech or advertising or search company like Zillow or Redfin, you're just not going to be able to compete. Because at the end of the day, the lowest cost structure provider is going to be the winner in the space. And so the one that's been able to automate the most technology, the infrastructure that has economies of scale, that's the one that's going to survive in a 5% fee marketplace with an asset as dynamic and heterogeneous as housing. So I think Redfin their iBuying venture is doomed as is. But OfferPad is doing a little bit better. They actually were able to secure more contribution profits than Opendoor per home sold in 2021. But I think that they're slightly different. OfferPad is more of a home flipper than Opendoor, right? OfferPad is moving cautiously, moving very slowly. Their underwriting standards are very, very cautious. And so they're finding homes that, maybe they have the highest conviction that they'll be able to sell the most quickly, or, they'll see, all we need to do is fix this kitchen. We've got a team in place. We fix the kitchen, we turn it. So they're more looking for homes that need a little bit more work, and but also that they're sure that they can flip in a reasonable amount of time. And it's corresponded to slightly higher gross profit margins. But at the end of the day, they're not investing in technology right now. And my concern is that long-term, they won't be able to scale into the opportunity that Opendoor is, because they're sacrificing pretty quarters today for the market opportunity tomorrow.
And yeah, I think that's a great point. I would love for you to talk about the end state. Like in 10 years, what do you think, based on the current trends, like the actual real estate market looks like? And, how do you actually go about buying and selling a home? Is it really going to change? Like, okay, iBuying is what, like 1 or 2% maybe of all transactions. Like, what does that look like with upper limits? Just kind of go crazy, talk about the end state in the ideal world.
Yeah. This is a great question. And this is kind of what gets me excited about Opendoor in general. But when you look at the traditional experience, and just as by way of anecdote, I was just in Nashville, came home this morning. I'm going to be going to Nashville next year. And we were actually in Nashville the past week looking for homes. And as you know, it's a seller's market right now. And so as a buyer, we went into it super excited. We're like, we're going to find our dream home. It's going to be perfect. Within about 8 hours of our day, we were like, I think we should just rent. This is miserable. the pitying looks from home builders and realtors about like, you should just live here for a year and then break your lease. If you find something, maybe, but we haven't been able to find anything for us. And it was miserable, right? There were no tools. And even when we were using Zillow, they'd say there's 8 homes available in this neighborhood. None of them are available, right? And so it's a miserable experience, even when you incorporate some of the search options that some of the real estate tech companies have been able to give us. So that's like the current state, right? Both the buyer system and the seller system is broken. And not only that, but it's the biggest asset of our lives. And so it should be good. My vision for 10 years from now is that if you want to, any home in the United States can be bought and sold with a tap of a button, e-commerce style, frictionless as possible. And not only that, but bundling will be a superpower for any of the companies that have survived and been able to assimilate the infrastructure needed in the real estate space. So it won't just be buying and selling a home, but it would be like, oh, I want this home. Give me, pre-approve me for an all cash offer. I make the offer on the house. Handle title and escrow, one tap. Mortgage, pre-approved, I got my mortgage. And not only that, but once you're moved in, there's all these other ancillary opportunities in the home, right? So like smart home technology, security and access, handyman as a service, cleaning, pool maintenance, all these little things about owning a home are going to be housed in one app. And it can be like a subscription service like Prime.
Yeah, really interesting. I think one thing that another bear thesis is that, people only buy or sell a home like very infrequently, like once every 20 years or something. And so the recurring nature is pretty tough. And so they're having to plow sales and marketing dollars in, but there's not really a recurring nature like Amazon. People are ordering every single day. So I'd just be interested in your perspective on that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think based on my research, the average American homeowner buys and sells a home or moves to a new home roughly every 7 to 8 years. So that's like the traditional home commerce cycle, if you will. And currently, Opendoor's model is a one-off, infrequent transaction, like you said. If your business is this like low margin, like what a crappy business. You have this low margin transaction that happens once every 8 years. And even if you delight your customer, they won't come back to you for 7 to 8 years. And so where's the margin? Like, why is this an appealing business? And that goes back to one of the concepts I wrote about recently, which was this Opendoor home concept, which is where, as opposed to this being a one-off transaction, you're actually able to maintain a relationship with a customer for decades, which would be really powerful. But what does that look like? And so one of the things that I talked about was this concept of home services. And so home renovation, we already talked about some of them, but in addition, things like home renovation, HVAC, if Opendoor owned your home at some point, it can tell you, oh, you need a new roof, and it can, push those into the app as needed. But all these different home maintenance verticals that can be added into the app, I think would provide for not just a one-off transaction, but then all these ancillary subscription services over many years.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting strategy where it's almost like iBuying is not a loss leader, but it's just like this break-even thing that gets people into this giant database where then you can push all of these ancillary services that are super high margin. And so, yeah, it's a really interesting model.
It's like milk.
Like milk. Say more.
Like milk is a loss leader at a grocery store, right? Like it gets people into the store, but then all the other high margin novelty items are what, like they're losing money on milk, but they'll make money on all the other things that you stop there for.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it would be interesting to talk, like Eric Wu has talked about this, right? Like phase 1 is sell to Opendoor, phase 2 is buy with Opendoor, phase 3 is live with Opendoor. And I think, what do you think is the biggest bottleneck for like the fact that currently it's not a very seamless e-commerce process? Like it's getting much better with selling to Opendoor, but what about the buying piece?
Yeah, I think, it almost speaks to how fast Opendoor is moving, that in 2021 they actually launched 2 buyer products, because they were just planning to focus on the seller ecosystem, but because it was such a seller's market, they launched Opendoor Back Offers and Opendoor Complete, which is the entire integrated process of buying and selling a home in one space. But I think that they're going to continue to scale that rapidly. And the reason that's so exciting is because the actual prospect of buy with Opendoor is sort of infinitely scalable. It's not like sell with Opendoor, where you have to hold all these homes on your balance sheet. If you're just buying for a customer, one, they love you because suddenly they've got an all cash offer. It's like being a millionaire with a tap of a button, right? So consumers love that experience. But also there's a guarantee that the customer will own that home. And so Opendoor doesn't have to hold it. They're not responsible for the cost, the customer is. And so as a consequence of having a massive balance sheet, it's much easier for Opendoor to scale the buyer ecosystem. But the other thing that's important is that all those ancillary fintech verticals like mortgage, title and escrow, home insurance, warranty, all of those things are really difficult to attach on the seller side, right? If you're selling me your home, you don't need a mortgage, right? Whereas if you're buying a home, maybe you do need a mortgage. And so it's much easier to attach those on the buyer side. And so as Opendoor is increasingly able to monetize the buyer side, I think we're going to see margins kick up in an impressive way. And to be honest, right now, the buyer side is a very, very small proportion of their business by revenue and by gross profit.
Interesting. Do you know off the top of your head by revenue, like how big it is?
I think it was either Q3 or Q2 that their buy with Opendoor was, or their buyer ecosystem was a 1 billion revenue run rate. So it's scaling very rapidly because that was actually a 2021 product. But just to give you an idea, I mean, they did 8 billion in revenue. So maybe it was 500, 700 million in 2021.
Okay, that's super helpful. So one thing that I'm really curious about is, you said the ideal state, one-click e-commerce experience is really the end goal. Like, has Opendoor talked about a marketplace model? Because I think everybody has talked about, okay, iBuying is like this first phase of maybe like a marketplace model where it's just like Amazon. People are selling their home, you can buy it, and there's no, middleman. Opendoor is just a platform, takes very small transaction fee versus, realtors taking 6%. And so, what does that marketplace look like? And are they very intentional about, we're headed that direction?
Yeah. So Eric Wu's been very clear that his plan is for Opendoor to become a marketplace model, and the seeds are planted. They're working towards that. The problem that a company like Opendoor faces is they don't dominate search, right? They're always going to be laggards in search to Zillow and Redfin, who have marketplace models. And so they have to come at it from a different way. And I think what they're trying to use is having exclusive inventory that they actually own to make that happen. And so they recently launched this concept called Opendoor Exclusives, which are homes that they own that they think are going to do really well, that they'll release, to people who have the Opendoor app. They'll release as an option for people to buy before they actually hit the open market. That's Opendoor Exclusives. And the caveat there is that you can't use a realtor or an offline professional, to negotiate or be involved in the process. And so it's higher margin for Opendoor because it doesn't have to pay the realtors, but also it's aggregating demand. And that's one piece. But as they continue to purchase more and more homes, when they have maybe in the order of 50 to 100,000 homes on the balance sheet at any given time, I think it'll be much easier for them to aggregate. By aggregating that supply, now they've got the demand as well, and they can build a marketplace.
I think that's really interesting because, homes are, it makes me kind of think of Airbnb, like, a home in an exotic location is a very unique piece of supply, and a home can be like that as well, versus something on Amazon can be just like a commodity product that you can get from anywhere. So I think, leaning into that is actually really interesting. So that's cool. So just talk to, like, what are some of the risks that like you are personally really worried about with Opendoor?
Yeah, so I see a lot of headwinds for Opendoor, and frankly, there's quite a few. but at the same time, I think that they're often called thesis killers. They're often referred to as like the reason that Opendoor will fail. And I've said this previously, but I think it's really important to be clear-eyed about your investments, and you should be the most critical about the potential risk factors facing the company. So for me, I think like there are mortal risks, and then there are also evolutionary risks, right? So the mortal risks to Opendoor would be like ironclad regulation. They can't price housing. They get stuck holding the bag like Zillow did, and they have to take inventory impairments that would devastate a quarter. A black swan event, and Opendoor actually, in fact, isn't able to predict fast enough or throw leverage into the right markets. These are all things that I worry about, but I also am monitoring. I can see them going both ways. There's not one thing that I'm sort of like, this is going to fail. And it all sort of goes back to the concept of product market fit. And I just don't think that there's another company right now that has the product market fit that Opendoor does. And it's not even necessarily how good their product is, which it's great, right? I think a big component of it is just how broken the traditional experience is, and how hard it's been perceived by tech companies in the past. And consequently, they haven't tried to optimize it, or haven't tried to optimize it in the hard ways where the pain points are most dense, and that's the transaction. And so when you combine a spectacular product with the traditional alternative being so weak, it's really hard for me to see Opendoor doing anything but to continue to grow into this hockey stick growth curve that we're just starting to see in 2021.
Yeah, it was really interesting when Zillow announced that they're getting out of iBuying, and one of the reasons the management team gave was that the market was too small, like it was too niche of a thing, and that just struck me as really interesting. That's kind of what they have to say, right? Like they spent all this time, and then okay, how do we get out of this market gracefully? But I just thought that, like, I guess the question is, what do you think is the upper limit of iBuying? Like, is there not an upper limit? Because I think the main narrative right now is that iBuying is a very niche thing, just for convenience, if you need to sell your home really quickly. But will this kind of be the default that people go to when they try to sell and buy a home?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's really hard to know, if this is going to be the way the majority of American homeowners transact in the future. I will say, I don't think it would be unreasonable if the majority of American homeowners started the process with an Opendoor offer. And honestly, I think everyone should, right? Like, it's totally free. You get an objective Kelly Blue Book value on your home. You don't have to take it, right? But you can use that as information. Knowledge is power, especially in residential real estate. Holy cow, what a challenging environment to navigate. And so I think most consumers will start with an Opendoor offer, but in terms of market share that Opendoor itself will have, I've talked about 20 to 25% market share, and I think that's very reasonable for the solution that they're providing. The other thing I'd say is that selling to Opendoor maybe will not have the same density as buy with Opendoor. Power buying, or the process of buying with an iBuyer, is, like I said, infinitely scalable. And so if you've got a big enough balance sheet, it's a really great way to make consumers happy and get them into your ecosystem in a high margin manner.
Gotcha. What would it look like for that to be infinitely scalable? Because the way I see it right now is they have to, really utilize sell with Opendoor so they can get all this inventory. Would they be able to, use you, like, as a consumer, would you be able to buy with Opendoor, like a non-Opendoor listing?
Yes, yeah. So that's a great question. So you can buy a home from Opendoor, which is different from an Opendoor backed offer. An Opendoor backed offer is like, you walking into Palo Alto and you saying, I want this house, but I don't have $1 million of cash, and that's what I'm competing with. Opendoor will say, okay, we'll give you $1 million as long as you can prove that you can, pay it back over a reasonable period of time. it's less so much about do you have the money, and more, let me put this cash in your pocket right now, like being a wealthy uncle or something like that. Let me put this money in your bank account right now, and so that you can get the home of your dreams, and then we'll figure it out on the back end. But it's a free service.
Okay, so Opendoor backed offers. And are they actually just offloading that mortgage to a third party, or they have those mortgages on the balance sheet?
Yeah, so they do originate more mortgages. Actually, in 2021, they acquired a company called Redfin, which, they had an interaction with the company and said it was delightful. It's like a 60-second mortgage qualification. And so in the first half of this year, they're actually working on integrating Redfin and its capabilities into all of its markets. And that's going back to what I was talking about. Like, we saw, I think, 6.5% contribution profit margins in 2021, with almost zero contribution from these high margin ancillary services. In 2022 and latter half and beyond, we're going to see a big uplift in margin, I think, as a consequence of having all of these ancillary services like mortgages attached.
Gotcha. So the main way that they're making money with the infinitely buying, like a buy with Opendoor, is just like a mortgage originator.
So mortgage origination, title and escrow are both, really, really powerful products and high margin.
Gotcha. Super interesting. So kind of the last question is, what would be something that you would see and then it would kind of cause you to change your mind about this market? Or is it pretty inevitable?
Oh no, I'm like I said, I got to be clear-eyed about this. It is my largest holding, but I'm always very critical. I want Opendoor to be perfect, and I know they want to be perfect, and not every quarter is perfect, but I think they're doing an incredible job. Yeah, I mean, I think if we just saw contribution margins compress to the point where they're not going up and there's no uplift despite HPA and peers are doing better, that would be like, what's going on? I'd really want to know about that. Like, that would bum me out, and I'd be like, what am I missing? On the other hand, there's one thing that Opendoor could do that I think would sharply improve the investment thesis. But it's hard. It's hard, like solving for logistics hard, like when Amazon built fulfillment centers hard. And that's if Opendoor can solve for moving. So the actual act of packing up belongings and transporting them, if they can build the infrastructure for that and use bundling, like I said, as a superpower. So say like, oh, you got your mortgage through Opendoor, you can move for free, as and you can pick your moving date. It's a white glove service. You have it delivered. Your movers put it in your house. If Opendoor can solve for that, I think the activation energy of the actual move will depress to a point where not only will people love the product, right, which is super powerful, right? Who needs a marketing campaign if you've got evangelists for customers? But the other thing is it actually feeds Opendoor's flywheel in a dramatic way, because by lowering the activation energy, people move more frequently, right? People who said, oh, I can't move, I don't have the money, I don't have the time or the convenience. Suddenly it's like, no, you can do this in tap of a button from your couch, right? You can keep watching Netflix, but you can schedule your move and you can go wherever it is that you want. It's a uniquely challenging problem to solve for moving, because it's atoms and bits, as opposed to just moving bits around the internet. But that's what iBuying is. And so I think Opendoor is uniquely positioned to capitalize on this opportunity. But if they could solve for that, that would be like this is a home run, every day of the week, twice on Sundays.
Really interesting. So has management talked about this moving idea and unlocking the liquidity, basically?
So there have been a few hints that this is something that they're considering. I don't think it'll be a near-term thing, because focus is critical, and not only are they scaling rapidly, but they also have to work on the buyer side, enter new markets, and manage a public persona, public market persona. But there are a few moments that Eric Wu, the CEO, has mentioned this. So at a PropTech Insight Summit. I believe he was asked the question of like which adjacent companies does he admire the most, and one of the companies he mentioned was Clutter, which is a very steeply valued, I think SoftBank backed private moving company, but they're vertically integrating the moving process. They also, I think, do pods and storage. But the more that I sort of dug into that as a strategic acquisition, the more it makes sense, right? It's like you're reducing the friction with this buying and selling process, but there is still one part that is very, very logistically, spiritually, emotionally challenging, and that's the actual physical part of moving. If you can bundle that into the offering, that's magic.
That would be really interesting. But I feel like the public-private kind of offset with valuations make that a little bit tough these days.
I do not want them to acquire Clutter. It would be, so what they did in 2021 is they basically acquired talent with all their acquisitions. They acquired Wildfire Pro, Skylight, and Red Door. And all of those were like, 20 million or less companies. And they were all sunsetted, and just the teams were brought on so that they had that talent and expertise, which goes back to their culture of frugality, right? They're not buying bloated companies. They can't do that. They're just buying what's absolutely necessary. I'd like to see them do that with moving. I would not want them to spend $1 billion, $2 billion on acquiring like low revenue, 4 years away from profitability company that's in the private markets.
Definitely. I remember listening to an interview with Eric Wu, and he's talking about how they brought in Amazon executives and just really trying to get that cost structure. And I think you're dead on. The lowest cost structure will win, and the consumer experience is way better than the traditional way. It's just kind of, if they can make it through, get to constant profitability, and the market is so variable. But it's also been like an all-time difficult time to buy all these homes, and so the fact that they are nearing profitability, even if it's really, really tough time, is interesting. So I think looking at Opendoor as like this market maker rather than a home flipper is kind of an interesting analogy. Would you talk to that just a little bit?
Yeah. A lot of people refer to Opendoor as a home flipper, and I've gotten into my fair share of semantic fights on Twitter over this, admittedly. But just plain and simple, I think a home flipper, I think we buy ugly houses, right? It's someone who's buying a distressed asset for a low price, who wants to fix up the asset and sell it for higher, right? The way that they make money is by buying low and selling high. That is not Opendoor's model. Opendoor is a transaction company, so it shouldn't matter, how much they buy and sell a home for. They make all their money in a fee, and so the reason that's important is because the incentives are different. They're trying to create a frictionless experience because they want more transactions, and so that's very different than a home flipper, for example. And one of the ways that this comes in handy is like going back to our conversation about a down market. Or an up market, right? We're in an up market now. In a down market, their service becomes much, much more valuable because people need liquidity. There's no options to them, right? They can put their home on the public market and just watch it depreciate every day for months and months, or they can have the equity in their back pocket that day from Opendoor. And so, not saying that Opendoor would raise fees, but the value proposition would be much crisper in that kind of environment, and that's where you start getting into this market maker sort of situation. The difference that we might see with like a company like Robinhood or Citadel, right? Payment for order flow. The spread is important, but it's not critical for Opendoor's business. They're guiding for a specific guidepost, so maybe 200 basis points is what they want to hit when they're reselling their home, so that they're in the 6 to 7% gross profit range. But overall, I think it's important to think of them as a transaction company that's providing liquidity.
Yeah, that's super helpful. So I really appreciate your time. Is there any other things that you want to talk about, or anything that we missed?
I had a great time chatting with you, man. I hope we get to talk again at some point. I really appreciate you having me on. I love talking about finance, and I don't get to do it too frequently. So thank you so much for having me.
Well, thanks for coming on. You crushed it, and really amazing stuff. So thanks, Tyler.
Yeah, thank you.